Well, welcome to another Victorious Friday. When we think about family, there's five core areas that we like to focus on, and one key area is to finance. Many a times, parents and families are really dealing with financial issues, especially during this time of COVID-19. Well, today I have a very special guest with me from Wells Fargo. His name is Marc Daner. And before I give you his background, I want to make sure that you know who he is. Marc Daner is a managing director. He deals with investments with Wells Fargo Advisors in Alpharetta, Georgia. But not only that, he's a certified financial planner. Um, he's a professional. He's been in this chartered financial consulting world for over 30 years of experience. And so we have a real champion here with us today. And he's been advising parents on many aspects of the financial management world. And he helps clients like you, clients like me, to plan for secure retirement. And so I asked him to come on and talk to me because he's been managing assets and liabilities and cash flow and so forth. And he's going to help us to avoid those unnecessary income, capital gains, and estate tax risk. When we talk about financing, it's really a big part of that is how do we manage our risk? And Marc is going to share with us some insights into that. But also, what I like about Marc is that his personal life. He's been married to his wife, Maria, for over 32 years now. And these days, that is something to talk about. And they have adult children. They've been residents of Alpharetta, Georgia, for 27 years. My home's city right now. But like any banker, we need to do a disclaimer. And so just for the lawyers and the legal folks, let me just read that disclaimer to you. Wells Fargo Advisors is not a tax or a legal advisor. Uh, Past performance is no guarantee of future results. We know that. And investments insurance products are not insured by an FDIC or any other federal government agency, and not a deposit of other obligations or of guaranteed by the bank of any bank affiliate, and are subject to investment risk and including possible loss of the principal amount invested. So you see they're covering themselves. And then at the same time, Wells Fargo Advisors is a trade name used by Wells Fargo Clearing Services LLC, member of SIPC, a registered broker dealer and non-bank affiliate of Wells Fargo and Company. So now that we've gotten the legal stuff out of the way, Marc can now open up and share with us his heart. But Marc, thank you for joining us and welcome to Victorious Friday.
Thank you, Terence. Do we have any time left after that disclosure?
I tell you, but it's always good to keep the lawyers at bay.
Exactly. Well, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I just want to jump right in. 32 years, children. Tell me a little bit about your marriage and your family, and where did you guys meet?
Sure. So I'm originally from New York, but I moved down here when I was about 13 years old. And my wife is from Havana, Cuba. She and her family immigrated here in 1963 or 4. She was about 4 or 5 years old when they came here. They actually moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, believe it or not. And her dad, I think, got pneumonia when they were first there. So it was a great welcome. But somehow we both ended up in New Orleans in the early 80s. And my wife worked with my brother at a health club. And I joined the health club. We met, and the rest was history.
Wow. That's fantastic. Now, does she still have family in Louisiana or?
No, neither one of us do. Everybody's moved away.
Okay, so none of them was impacted by the storm then that came through.
No.
Okay, great,
Thankfully.
great. Well, my friend, I have some, just some time with you. We're just going to have a conversation. And one thing I was thinking about, Marc, is that, many families, they're concerned right now about their finances, their savings, in light of these challenges that we're all facing with COVID-19. And what would you say the economy is right now?
Well, I think really right now, there are almost two economies. There's the economy for investors, people who have accumulated assets and are investing in their 401k or mutual funds or stocks of any kind. And for them, right now, the economy is doing great. We had a record of, I think, the second quickest 30% plus drop in the stock market in history. I think the first one was during the Great Depression, but in February and March, the stock market was down 34% as measured by the S&P 500. But since March 23rd, the market is up roughly 57%. And it's actually, the S&P is actually higher now than it was in February. The Dow still has about 4% to go, but the S&P is up higher than it was in February. So for investors, they have, if they didn't panic during the downturn and get out of their stocks or mutual funds, they've recovered everything. And so, from that standpoint, things are going very, very well. For people who may have been affected by a layoff or, lost their job or a furlough or anything like that during the COVID shutdowns, things are getting better. Okay, they're not where they were, but they're definitely getting better. I think in March or I'm sorry, April, we lost over 20 million jobs in the United States through the economic shutdown. But then May, we had 2.7 million jobs come back, 4.8 million in June, and 1.8 million in July. And we've seen the unemployment rate go from roughly almost 15% down to under 11%. So things are getting better, but we still have a long way to go. The housing market is doing very well. The production, industrial production and retail is doing very well. A lot of the large businesses are doing very well. You look at companies that were deemed essential by the government. They all had increased sales, increased profits, but the smaller and mid-sized companies, they really got hurt, but they're starting to come back. I think in the restaurant and food and beverage industry, over 2.5 million jobs have come back, but we're still maybe 2.5 to 3 million jobs below where we were in February. So it really depends on a person's specific situation. But for the people who were the most affected by the COVID economic shutdowns, we still have a fair way to go, but we are definitely in a recovery phase.
Yeah, absolutely. And many parents are thinking about what type of plans they should make right now. Maybe they had a little bit in their 401k. Maybe they, maybe they had some type of severance before they were either laid off, furloughed, or what have you. If you were looking at some financial plans that you should be thinking about or making right now, what would you suggest? What would be some thinking that one would go through as they're thinking about investing in their future to try to, survive through this time period?
Sure. Well, I think, this has taught us that, everybody knows you should have some type of emergency fund. I think what COVID taught us is that emergency fund should probably be larger than what most financial planners or financial advisors have recommended in the past, because you just never know what could happen to your job or to your business.
Yes.
And having cash on hand, emergency money that you can get to is important. Potentially having sources of line of credit would be important, home equity line of credit or something like that. But I think this also taught us, again, the importance of not getting too optimistic or aggressive with your investments. I've seen this a lot in my career. In my 30 years, I've seen a lot of significant downturns in the stock market. And usually they come when people least expect it. And the market has been doing very, very well. and people get overly aggressive. They either have more money in the stock market than they should have, or they get concentrated in areas of the stock market that are producing the best returns during an economic boom. And those typically will be, again, past performance doesn't equal the future, but a lot of times the areas of the market that are doing the best during a boom are going to be the ones that are hit the hardest during a downturn.
Yeah.
So, a lot of investors will chase returns during an economic boom. And I think they really have to pay attention to risk when the market is going up rather than after the market has turned down. And now's a good time to reassess your risk. With the market recovery, do you have more than you should in the stock market? Do you have a large exposure to, say, the technology stocks that have done so well? It's a good time to sort of reassess, what if COVID comes back really strong in the fall and there are another round of shutdowns? Are you overly aggressive right now? So I think this is really a good time to reevaluate the level of risk in your 401k or other investments you may have.
Yeah, I think about many now are invested in 401ks. They may not even realize that they are or what they're invested in. If I'm out here and I have a 401k, and many don't know they can make that adjustment maybe anytime and certainly for it to have an impact. What advice would you give for those that have 401ks and, what should they be looking at? Should they just leave it alone, not touch it? Is there something, kind of a checkup they should be looking at? What would you recommend for those that have 401ks and saving plans, and any word of advice for those individuals as
Sure.
during this time?
So it is important to look at the different investment options that you have in your 401k. A lot of people that I meet, when we look at how they chose their 401k, they did it strictly based on past performance. And so they'll look at the investment options that are in their 401k, and they might look at the 1 and 3 and 5 year return and choose the few investments that have done the best over that time frame. That will typically concentrate them in very aggressive investments. So, they have to understand what the level of risk in those investments are. And sometimes that's difficult to do. You can look at things like maybe Morningstar. If you don't have a financial advisor who can tell you what level of risk is in your 401k, you can look at the mutual funds you own in your 401k through a service like Morningstar, or anything that can tell you what percentage of the funds are in stocks, what are in bonds, et cetera. But I would encourage people to look at all the choices in their 401k and look at what options are available under the fixed income or stable value funds. And, don't get too conservative. If you're a young person, if you're in your 30s and 40s and you have many years ahead of you to work, you should be fairly aggressive. But, you want to look at perhaps some balance and have some money in those lower return, lower risk, fixed income or stable value funds, so that when the next downturn comes, whether it's due to COVID or some other reason, not all of your money is in the most aggressive investments. And that's a lot of what I do as a financial advisor, is helping people identify the level of risk that is in their current investments. And a lot of people don't realize how much risk they're taking, especially with their 401k. But the other thing, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so they would be comfortable, for example, in seeking out a financial advisor like yourself, maybe even bring their portfolio with them, their company 401k, et cetera, and say, hey, I like to get a checkup, Mark or whoever, and you guys could take a look at that and maybe give them some advice in which direction they should go.
That's right. Any good financial advisor is going to have a lot of tools at their disposal to help you measure the risk return potential of your portfolio. So you can determine whether or not this is a level of risk that is comfortable. Also, a question that I find a lot of people don't know is what rate of return do you need to earn on things like your 401k and other investments in order to meet your retirement goals or in order to put your children through college. Depending on how much you save, how much you have, how much retirement and college are going to cost you, there are multiple ways, either through a financial advisor or through calculators with your employer or other websites to calculate the rate of return that you need to meet your goals. And so if all of your financial goals could be met with a 7% a year return, you don't need to take the risk to get the 10% return. That is what, at least in my opinion, would be considered unnecessary risk. So there are tools for that. There are tools to tell you how much risk are in your portfolio, and any good financial advisor can help you with those questions.
Yeah. I know that many people with 401ks, they simply just invest in their company stock, whatever it is, and they let that, or maybe they even get stock options and so forth, and they leave it in their company stock, and they, any words of advice? Some will say, diversify that portfolio based on your risk factor. Some will say, hey, if that company's doing well, just continue to ride the wave, right? Any just generic thoughts around whether or not you should kind of leave everything within one company, if that's your company, although you know what's going on in that company, you're probably best informed. What would be your thoughts around that scenario?
So this is probably one of the biggest risks that I see people who work for a large company take, and it can pay off. For many people, they built their wealth through their company stock, but it can also be it can be really something that can destroy your retirement. And I saw this a lot more during the .com bubble and bust in the early 2000s. People who had all of their money in tech and telecom stocks and lost 70, 80, 90% of their retirement, and couldn't afford to retire, or couldn't afford the lifestyle that they were planning on. So it is a very big risk. It's probably one of the biggest risks that you can take, is to put all of your money in your company stock. A reasonable amount in the stock purchase plan or stock options, it typically helps you build wealth if it's a good company. But I also think people overestimate how well they know their company. Unless you're one of the top 5 or 6 executives in the company, you don't have any inside information that an outsider doesn't have. And so, keep in mind, if you have a lot of money in your company stock, there should be a point at which you diversify, regardless. And especially if the stock starts to move in the opposite direction of the overall stock market, that should be a wake-up call for you.
One of the questions I get often as well, or people should be thinking about, is really estate planning and wills and things like that. And many of the young folks, they feel like, hey, I don't need a will right now. I'll deal with that later. Or I'm not saving right now. I don't have any money to save. And I always advise them to is at least minimum put in a match of what the company is doing. So if the company's matching 3 or 4% or 6%, try to at least achieve that level of investment. And then my encouragement is to try to increase that, let's say 1% a year as a goal, until, if you can, get to about 18%, which used to be the maximum you put in. I don't know if that law has changed or not, but you can inform us on that. But give me your thoughts on for the younger generation. And then I'm going to have a follow-up question, because we're in one of the largest wealth transfers that this nation has ever seen. We've gone from builders to boomers, and now Gen Y, and then soon millennials and soon Gen Zs. But right now, that wealth transfer is the largest that this nation has seen. And so a lot of money is being transferred from one generation to the next. And so planning and risk management and all of that's going to be critical. So give me your thoughts. One, on the younger generation, how they should look at things and protect themselves and wills and estate planning, things like that. When is it too early to get started or not too early to get started? And then secondly, speak to me around this wealth transfer and how to manage those funds that you may have inherited or maybe transferred to you that you may not have thought about, because you haven't had
Yeah.
that type of capital before. Any
Right.
thoughts on those two?
Absolutely. So there's two parts to estate planning. There is the what happens when you die part, which is what most people think of estate planning. But there is also the part of what happens if you are become physically or mentally incapacitated. So, really, as soon as a person is a legal adult, even if they're not married, they should consider the second part of estate planning. Even if they have no assets, the looking at things like powers of attorney, an advance directive for healthcare, a living will. People assume, I think most people I talk to assume that if their 18 or 19-year-old child gets in a car accident and is in a coma, the parents immediately have the right to make medical decisions. Well, most likely that would probably happen through a process of, you might have to go to court, but there's always the possibility that someone could challenge them. So it's really important for any person who is of the age of majority to have a living will and a healthcare power of attorney, and maybe even a financial power of attorney so that they can choose who would make those decisions on their behalf. Then really, as soon as you have any assets or you get married and have a child, it's very important, in my opinion, to have a will. Because if you don't have a will, you take the potential of the courts deciding who's going to raise your children. And that can create a lot of acrimony with the family that's left behind. So 100% in my opinion, if you have a child, you should have a will, power of attorney, financial power of attorney, and a healthcare power of attorney. And even if you're totally single, no children, you at least ought to consider having a financial power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney. On the other side, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. On the other side, if you're, when you have assets, then you need to sit down with an attorney and think about whether you want to have a traditional will or maybe a living trust to help you avoid probate. You need to make sure that any 401ks, IRAs, life insurance policies have named beneficiaries, because that will avoid probate automatically if your retirement accounts and your insurance plans have named beneficiaries. I find that is something that a lot of people neglect, especially when they change jobs or leave an old 401k behind. They don't update the beneficiaries as their life changes. I've met married people who have children who still have their parents as the beneficiary of their 401k.
Yeah.
So those are important things to look at. For people who inherit money, you have to look at how that money is received. Is some of that money from a 401k or an IRA? If it is, you need to think about keeping the ownership or the taxation of that money in that tax-deferred type of a plan. So, there are things referred to as inherited IRAs, where you can take your parents' 401k after they pass away and roll it into an inherited IRA. And you're allowed to, instead of having to pay taxes on all of that money right away, you can spread the distributions out for up to 10 years. So those are things to think about. If you're married, thinking about keeping your inheritance money separate from your other assets is something to think about, because again, I'm not a lawyer, but from my understanding, inheritance in most states is not considered marital property unless you mix it or mingle it with marital property. So those are some things to think about. Putting together a plan to help you preserve that money, and definitely looking at how it's invested. If you've inherited money from your 75-year-old parents and you're 45 years old, those investments may not be appropriate for you. So it's time to really look at the investments and are they appropriate for your situation versus your parents' situation.
Well, that's a really good point, Mark. And I would also, I love that. And many of us, I just redid my trust and so forth. It's 20 years old, right? We did it 20 years ago. The kids were still young, and we had made certain decisions, and that needed to change, and our situation needed to change. So I would advise just everyone out there, if you have an existing trust or will and so forth, what would you recommend is a good time frame that you should do maybe a checkup or an update, because forms change, processes change, your situation changes. Is there kind of a recommended date that you should maybe look at doing a checkup, if you will, every so many years? What would you advise?
I would say for your estate plans, obviously if anything in your life has changed, if you had minor children and now they're adults, or if you have another child, or if you get divorced, immediately look at your estate plan. If nothing in your life has changed, I would say 3 to 5 years, certainly no more than every 5 years, to look at that and make sure it still reflects your wishes. Is the person who is going to be the executor of your estate still the person you want to be the executor? And sometimes, people will reread their wills and think, well, I don't really, I feel differently now. I'd like to make a change. And so I think no more than every 5 years.
Here's a basic question that many people don't even think about is, okay, I completed my paperwork. I've updated my wills or my trust or what have you. Where do I keep the documents?
Yeah.
Who do I share the
question.
document with? Give me your thoughts around that.
So most attorneys that I've spoken to will recommend that your wills, the original of your wills, should be kept in a safe deposit box, but you should have a copy in your home records. With powers of attorney, it's different. A power of attorney should be easily accessible to the person who you've named as your agent, especially the healthcare power of attorney, because they're going to need a copy if you're in the hospital or if you're incapacitated. They need that. So, the healthcare power of attorney probably should be with the person who is your agent. But the financial powers of attorney, the wills, things like that, should be kept in a safe deposit box. But you should have a list in your house, where your executor knows they can find it, of all of your documents and where they are, all of the accounts that you have, what institutions are they with. Potentially it's a good idea to have somewhere, secure, but somewhere where your executor can find it, your usernames and passwords, because with so many things online now, I've seen situations where it takes executors or beneficiaries months to clean up an estate just because they didn't know where things were or how to access those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have this thing. I was teaching, have maybe a booklet or some type of place where you're keeping your documents. Many people have investments all over the place, even multiple banks, multiple bank statements come, typically now you don't get bank statements in, it's all electronic and online. Whereas before you used to get a physical copy, and they need to consolidate that, at least let folks know where these different accounts are, and so they can easily assess them and so forth. One of the questions I also get, I love to get your thoughts, although this isn't your area of expertise, but as this society is getting older now, one of the things they're dealing with from their wills is the fact of life insurance, and they're dealing with that, and it's sometimes that could get kind of tricky um, around that. Any thoughts in terms of as I'm looking at life and maturing in life? I have kids coming up. One of the things we had to really discuss in our estate planning was when do we release the funds? For example, if my kids are 13, let's say, and I don't want them to get all the funds at 13, 15 years old, I may want to ration that out over a period of time. You can do whatever you feel comfortable with, but any thoughts along those lines as to how we should maybe manage those funds and give, maybe not give kids this kind of lump sum payment when they're
Yep.
21 or
Yep.
18, to go out. Maybe they're not mature enough to handle that. Maybe that might put them in a situation. Any thoughts around that for parents?
Yes, I've run into this a lot in my career, and it is something that should be discussed with an attorney. But I have seen the use of something called a children's trust that is very different from a living trust. It's something that's written into your will, and it is established at your death for your children or your grandchildren, that you can decide while you're alive at what stage do your children get money. So as an example, when my children were young, our children's trust appointed a trustee, and that trustee could disperse funds for the benefit of my children at any time. But then at ages 25, 30, and 35, they would get a third of the principal in the trust. So you can establish specific ages, or if you have possibly a child who has struggled a lot, maybe has some type of mental or physical incapacity, and you want to make sure that child is taken care of for life, you can have a trust written into your will that is managed by a third party, whether it be a person that you trust or some type of qualified corporate trustee. But keep that money in trust for that person's lifetime. So those are tools that are definitely available for parents, grandparents, for minor children, or for adults that they either feel are just not ready, or who have some type of challenge that they're going to live with for the rest of their lives. And that's very important. It's a good thing to think about.
Well, Mark, this has been great, my friend. We could go on for hours and talk about this, and probably still don't have enough time. And we love to maybe have you back on the show again, and we can maybe tackle a few more issues and topics. But thank you so much. I want to do this as we wrap up. This is Victorious Friday, and so parents are looking at it and they're trying to walk away with maybe one or two nuggets, tips. In this particular case around finances and estate planning and all of that. Let me give you the floor with this last question. I'm gonna have one last question after that. And if you were to leave one tip on this Victorious Friday to parents who are going through this whole financial crisis and dealing with so much, but yet there's one tip that they should know, what would it be? What would you leave them with?
I think investing in yourself, whether that be investing in knowledge. If you were really laid off and affected by this, maybe it's time to gain some knowledge in a different industry, or investing in yourself. I love your idea of the 1% per year. I've preached that my whole career to young people. Start off at 1%, make it 2% and 3%, but invest in yourself, whether it be money, paying yourself first, right out of your paycheck, or investing in learning a new skill or a new industry.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I agree. And I even have fun with the young kids. I start them out. If you can do this, it'll increase savings tremendously, and it'll be a great present to give them at 18 years old. And what I do is say, put a penny away a day. And then the next day, double that penny. So the first day, a penny, the second day, 2 pennies, the third day, 3 pennies, and just keep that up. You'll find that by the time you get to 18 years old, they've got a pretty good nest egg put away. Now it's gonna start to add up for you because it's nothing like compounded interest, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
compounded gains as well. But I wanted to teach my children around savings at an early age, as my father did me. When I first went to work, he says, "Hey, 10% has to go towards a savings plan." And back then they had a little passbook savings account. So you had to put it in
Yep.
there and take it to the bank and they show you how much you had. And it added up pretty quick. And you were able to look at it back then. I couldn't write checks and so forth. I was too young. But now there's so many options. But I like that idea of just put a penny away a day and double it.
I
And
think
each
that's
day
great. Yep.
add a penny.
Yep. Saving, and I think it's real important to teach kids about saving and giving at a very young
Yes.
age, because that can develop, a lifetime of good habits. It really can.
Oh, I love that. I love that generosity piece. And thank you for sharing that. Well, my last question of the last question, my friend, is there's something about Mark that makes him a fun guy. Uh, I mean, what would it be?
Well, probably the fact that I'm a New York Jew and my wife is a Cuban Catholic. And that has made for some fun times over the last 32 years, and melding those two different cultures.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for joining Victorious Friday. We're shown every other Friday at 12 o'clock noon. And because of, I'm looking at great guests like Mark, and who has a ton of wisdom. We hope to have him on again. Mark, I know that when you talk investments, it's kind of limited in terms of your responsibility and who you can connect with because of different laws. But how can people reach out to connect with you here in Georgia or here in Alpharetta, Georgia?
Sure.
What's the best way to connect with you?
So I would recommend people go to my website. It's my first and last name, Marc, M-A-R-C, Daner, D-A-N-E-R.com. And I think if you just search Marc Daner, Wells Fargo Advisors, I'm the only person on the internet there.
Okay.
But
And,
it's Marc with a C.
And Wells Fargo has a great deal of advisors all around the country. And
That's
so
correct.
if you need to reach an advisor in your respective state or city, et cetera, the best way would be what? Go to Wells Fargo Advisors? Or what's the best?
WellsFargoAdvisors.com.
Okay.
I'd say check my website. I am registered in multiple states. Off the
Okay.
top of my head, I can't remember which ones, but probably 20. But you can find local advisors at WellsFargoAdvisors.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mark, for coming on. And you can find us at victoriousfamily.org. We love to hear from you. If you have any questions, additional questions, I can get to Mark. We'd be more than happy to shoot him his way. Maybe he'll be generous enough to give us another section of his time, and we'll get him back on. Mark, thank you. You've been a wonderful guest, and I'm just praying that we continue to build a friendship that we didn't have prior to this, and just getting to know you has been a real joy for me.
Well, same here, Terence. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome, my friend. Well, you have a great week, and let's keep our risk low.
All right. Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.